Good evening, everybody. I don't know if there's anyone here yet, but thanks for joining in, or if not, you're joining later, join later. This is our third installment of the Read Aloud for Rainbow's End. And for people, I have a link to the other two. If people haven't heard and you're just joining us, but if you want to listen to the other chapters, you can afterwards go to the link. And I'm just going to give just a brief overview if you're totally new to this, and just to revisit. This is a book by Werner Vinci. He is a former math professor from, I think, San Diego State. And he posited the idea of the singularity. And so this book is a fictional novel set in 2025 San Diego in a world of sort of augmented reality dystopia. And so the first chapters that we read were sort of the prologue, and it was about essentially setting up the framing around sort of a global intelligence community investigating a pandemic type of threat where the virus was a mind control virus. Okay. And so they were employing these high level sort of global interests, one from India, one from Germany, and one from Japan, to hire this agent to go in and help them sort of intervene in what they imagined as a mind control virus. So that was the first read aloud. And then the one that we did 2 days ago introduced the other subset of characters, and that was Robert Gu. And he became a candidate for this sort of fancy bio-nanotechnological makeover, which was very successful. And so those chapters were sort of gradually bringing him back from a state, a sort of a vegetative state, into functionality, full functionality within the context of his son. So his name is Robert Gu, and then his son is Bobby, or Bob Gu. Bob and his wife Alice are work at Camp Pendleton, I think, and they're sort of high-level military cyber intelligence. And Robert Gu has a young granddaughter. She's like a tween sort of age, and she's very bright. And so that's Mary, and Mary's bringing her grandfather sort of along and teaching them all of these new technologies that have developed since he got his disease and kind of checked out. So those are the first two sections. The next, I think generally I read about 2 chapters, and it's not quite an hour, but that's about where we're at. Actually introduce another plot line, and this is the main character in this section his name is Juan Orozco, which is interesting because I sort of owe folks another SlideShare presentation on Orozco, the Mexican muralist artist, which I haven't gotten to, but that's an interesting idea. So he is a student at what's called Fairmount High. And at the end of the last reading that we did, Robert Gu was now functional, and Alice, who kind of wanted to get him out of the house, his daughter-in-law, said, well, Robert, I think you should go take some classes at sort of like the continuing education high school. And this is a high school for, students who are not top students, and then sort of older adults who are coming back from things. So it's kind of an oddball high school. So in these chapters, we're going to learn about Juan. And what I remember, and again, when I first read this in 2015, so the book was written in 2006. I read it when I was doing my work activism around educational technology and understanding beacons and sensors and augmented reality. And this was about 2015. So really before any of this hit in a really big way. But I was starting to get a handle on it. And when Pokemon Go happened, I was like, and I knew it was in QTEL. I'm like, that's the test case. That's what we're dealing with. And there was a blog post that said, there have been a lot of people thinking about the issues of ethics in virtual worlds. This isn't anything totally new. And some references. So this was one of the books. And so I read it in 2015, and I'm getting a lot more out of it now, reading it in 2022, because the technology is more advanced and I understand the context better. Vinci did say, and I have a clip in the playlist there, that when someone asked where he got all of his ideas, he said, well, I live in San Diego and have a lot of friends who are building this. So in fact, in some ways, it's very hard for me to keep up. So these couple of chapters here about Juan sort of walking through his neighborhood, I think hit very closely on like the augmented reality technology. Okay, so this chapter is called An Excellent Affiliates. So I'll get started. Juan Orozco liked to walk to school with the Radner twins. Fred and Jerry were a bad influence, but they were the best gamers Juan knew in person. We've got a special scam for today, Juan, said Fred. Yeah, said Jerry, smiling the way he did when something really fun or embarrassing was on the way. The three followed the usual path along the flood control channel. The concrete trough was dry and bone white, winding its way through the canyon behind the Mesita subdivision. The hills above them were covered with ice plant and manzanita ahead. Ahead was a patch of scrub oak. What do you expect of San Diego North County in early October? At least in the real world. The canyon was not a dead zone. Not at all. County flood control kept the whole area improved, and the public layer was just as fine on city streets. And as they walked, Juan gave a shrug and a twitch, just so that was enough cue for his epiphany wearable. Its overlay imagery shifted into Hasek's dangerous knowledge world. The manzanita morphed into scaly tentacles, and now the houses that edged the canyon were large and heavily timbered, with pennants flying. High ahead was a castle, the home of Grand Duke Joaquin, in reality the local kid who did the most to maintain this belief circle. Juan tricked out the twins in the leather armor of Knight's Guardian. Hey, Jer, look, Juan radiated and waited for the twins to slide into consensus with his view. He had been practicing a week to get these visuals in place. Fred looked up, accepting the imagery that Juan had conjured. That's old stuff, Juanito. He glanced at the castle on the hill. Besides, Howie Fine is a twit. Oh? Juan released the vision in an untidy cascade. The real world took back its own. First the landscape, then the sky, then the creatures' costumes. But you liked it last week. Back when Juan now remembered, Fred and Jerry had been maneuvering to oust the Grand Duke. The twins looked at each other. Juan could tell they were silent messaging. We told you today would be different. We're onto something special. They were partway through the scrub oak now. Coming out the far side, you could see the ocean haze on a clear day, or if you could use clear vision, you could see all the way to the ocean. On the south were more subdivisions and a patch of green that was Fairmount High School. On the north was the most interesting place in Juan Orozco's neighborhood. Pyramid Hill Amusement Park dominated the little valley that surrounded it. The underlying rock was a more pointy hill than a pyramid, but the park's management thought pyramid was the sexier adjective. Once upon a time, it had been an avocado orchard, dark green trees clothing the hillsides. You could see it that way if you used the park's logo view. To the naked eye, there were still lots of trees, but there were also mansions and the launch tower, among other things. Pyramid Hill claimed to have the longest free fall ride in California. The twins were grinning at him. Jerry waved at the hill. How would you like to play Cretaceous Returns, but with real feeling? Pyramid Hill managers knew exactly what to charge for different levels of touchy-feely experience. The low end was pretty cheap. Real feeling was at the top. That's too expensive. Sure it is, if you pay. And don't you have a project to set up before class? The twins had shop class first thing in the morning. That's still in Vancouver, said Jerry. But don't worry about us. Fred looked upward, somewhat prayerful and smug at the same time. Up Express will provide, and just in time. Well, okay, just so we don't get into trouble. Getting into trouble was the major downside of hanging with the Radners. Sorry, we have a loud dog out there. A couple of weeks earlier, the twins had shown him how to avoid a product safety recall on his new Wiki Bay bicycle. That had left him with a great martial arts weapon and a bike that was almost impossible to unfold. Ma had not been pleased. Hey, don't worry, Juan. The three left the edge of the flood channel and followed a narrow trail along the east edge of Pyramid Hill. This was far from any entrance, but the twins' uncle worked for county flood control, and they had access to CFC utility support imagery, which just now they shared with Juan. The dirt beneath their feet became fairly translucent. 15 feet down, Juan could see graphics representing a 10-inch runoff tunnel. Here and there were pointers to local maintenance records. Jerry and Fred had used such omniscience before and not been caught. Today, they were blending it with a map of the local network nodes. The overlay view was faint violet against the sunlit day, showing communication blind spots and active high-rate links. The two stopped at the edge of a clearing. Fred looked at Jerry. Flood control should be ashamed. That's not a localizer node within 30 feet. Yeah, Jer, almost anything could happen here. And without a complete localizer mesh, nodes could not know precisely where they and their neighbors were. High rate laser comm could not be established, and low rate sensor output was smeared across the landscape. The outside world knew only mushy vagueness about this area. They walked into the clearing. They were deep in a network blind spot, but from here they had a naked eye view up the hillside to ground that must be surely within Pyramid Hill. If they continued that way, the hill would start charging them. But the twins were not looking at the hill. Jerry walked to a small tree and squinted up. In fact, this is an interesting spot. They tried to patch the coverage with an air ball. He pointed into the branches and pinged. The utility view showed only a faint return, an error message. It's almost purely net guano at this point. Juan shrugged. The gap will be fixed by tonight. Around twilight, when the aerobots flitted around the canyon, swapping out nodes here and there. Well, why don't we help the county by patching things up right now? Jerry held up a thumb-sized greenish object, and he handed it to Juan. 3 antenna fins sprouted from the thing's top. It was a typical ad hoc node. The dead ones were more trouble than bird poop. You've perved this thing? The node had break-ins are us written all over it. But perverting networks was harder in real life than in games. Where did you get the access codes? Uncle Don gets careless. Jerry pointed at the device. All the permissions are loaded. Unfortunately, the bottleneck node is still active. He pointed upward into the sapling's branches. You're small enough to climb this, Juan. Just go up and knock down the node. Hey, don't worry. Homeland Security won't notice. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security would almost certainly notice, at least after the localizer mesh was patched, but as certainly they wouldn't care. DHS logic was deeply embedded in all hardware. See all, know all was their motto. But what they knew and saw was for their own mission. They were notorious about not sharing with law enforcement. Juan stepped out of the blind spot and took a look at the sheriff's department view. The area around Pyramid Hill had its share of arrests, mostly for enhancement drugs, but there had been nothing hereabouts for several weeks. Okay. Juan came back to the tree and scrambled up about 10 feet to where the branches spread out. The old node was hanging from a rotted Velcro. He knocked it free, and the twins caused it to have an accident with a rock. Juan shimmied down from the tree, and they watched the diagnostics for a moment. Violet mists sharpened into bright spots as the nodes figured out where they were and their perved sibling were, and coordinated up towards full function. Now point-to-point laser routing was available. They could see the property labels all along the boundary of Pyramid Hill. Ha! The twins started uphill toward the property line. Come on, Juan, we're marked as county employees. We'll be fine if we don't stay too long. Pyramid Hill had all the latest touchy-feely gear. They were not just phantoms painted by your contact lenses on the back of your eyeballs. On Pyramid Hill, there were games where you could ride a Scoochie salsapood or steal the eggs of raptors, or games with warm, furry creatures that danced playfully around, begging to be picked up and cuddled. If you turned off all the game views, you could see the other players wandering through the woods, each in their own worlds. Somehow the hill kept them from crashing into each other. In Cretaceous Returns, the sound of free-fall launcher was disguised as thunder. The trees were imagined as towering ginkgos with lots of places you couldn't see through. Juan played the pure visual Kret-Ret a lot these days, in person with the twins and all over the world with others. It had not been an uplifting experience. He had been killed and eaten 3 times so far this week. It was a tough game, one where you had to contribute, or maybe you got killed and eaten every time. So Juan had joined the Fantasists Guild, well, as a junior wannabe member. Maybe that would make him clueful. He already had designed a species for Kret-Ret. His saurians were quick, small things that didn't attract the fiercest of critics. The twins had not been impressed, though they had no alternatives of their own. And as he walked through the ginkgo forest, he kept his eyes out for critters with jaws lurking in the lower branches. That's what had gotten him on Monday. On Tuesday, it had been some kind of paleo disease. So far, things seemed safe enough, but there was no sign of his own contribution. They had been fast breeding and scalable, so where were the little monsters? Sigh. Sometimes he could check out the other game sites. They might be big in Kazakhstan. Here, today, nada. Juan stumped across the hill, a little discouraged, but still uneaten. The twins had taken the form of a game standard velociraptors. They were having a grand time. Their chicken sized prey were Pyramid Hill game bots. The Jerry Raptor looked over his shoulder at Juan. Where's your critter? Juan had not assumed any animal form. I'm a time traveler, he said. That was a valid type introduced in the initial game release. Fred flashed a face full of teeth. I mean, where are the critters you invented last week? I don't know. Most likely they got eaten by the critics, said Jerry. The brothers did a joint reptilian chortle. Give up on making creator points, Juan. Kick back and use the good stuff. He illustrated with a soccer kick that connected with something that scuttled across their path. That got lots of classic points and a few thrilling moments of quality carnage. Fred joined in and red splattered everywhere. There was something familiar about this prey. It was young and clever looking, a newborn from Juan's own design. And that meant its mommy would be nearby. Juan said, I don't think the problem is none of you think nearly enough. The sound was premium external, like sticking your head inside an old-time boombox. Too late, they saw that the tree trunks behind them grew from yard-long claws. Mommy. Drool fell in 10-inch blobs from high above. This was Juan's design scaled up to the max. Shh, said Fred. It was his last hiss as a velociraptor. The head and teeth behind the slobber descended from the ginkgo canopy and swallowed Fred down to the tips of his hind toes. The monster crunched and munched for a moment. The clearing was filled with the sound of splintering bones. Ah! The monster opened its mouth and vomited horror. It was so good, Juan flicker viewed on reality. Fred was standing in the steaming remains of his raptor. His shirt was pulled out of his pants and he was drenched in slime. Real smelly slime, the kind you paid money for. The monster itself was on one of the hill's largest mechanicals, tricked out as a member of Juan's new species. The three of them looked up into its jaws. Was that touchy-feely enough for you? The creature said, its breath a hot breeze of rotting meat. For sure it was. Fred stepped backwards and almost slipped on the goo. The late Fred Radner just lost a cartload of points. The monster waved its truck-sized snout at them, and I'm still hungry. I suggest you move off the hill with all dispatch. They backed away, their gaze caught on the monster's teeth. The twins turned and ran. As usual, Juan was an instant behind them. Something like a big hand grabbed him. You, I have further business with. The words were a blurred roar through clenched fangs. Sit down. Let's chat. Caray, I have the worst luck. And then he remembered that it had been Juan Orozco who had climbed a tree to perv the hill entrance logic. Stupid Juan Orozco didn't need bad luck. He was already the perfect chump. And now the twins were gone. But when Jaws set him down and he turned around, the monster was still there, not some Pyramid Hill rent-a-cop. Maybe this really was a Cret-Ret player. He edged sideways, trying to get out from under the pendulous gaze. This was just a game. I mean, he could walk away from this 4-story saurian. Of course, that would trash his credit with Cretaceous returns and maybe drench him in smelly goo. And if Big Lizard took its place seriously, I mean, it might cause him trouble in other games. Okay. He sat down with his back to the nearest ginkgo. So he would be late another day. That couldn't make his school situation any worse. The saurian settled back and slid the steaming corpse of Fred Radner's raptor to one side. It brought its head close to the ground to look at Juan straight on. The eyes and head and color were exactly Juan's original design, and this player had the moves to make it truly expressive. He could see from its battle scars that it had fought in several Cretaceous hotspots. Juan forced a cheerful smile. So, you like my design? It's been worse. The creature lifted game parameters, bringing up critic layer details. This was a heavy player, maybe even a game cracker. On the ground between them was a dead and dissected example of Juan's creation. Big Lizard nudged it with a foreclaw. But the skin text cliche, the plaid kilt would be cute if it weren't in all the Epiphany Now ads. Juan drew his knees in toward his chin. This was the same crap to put up with at school. I borrow from the best. The Saurian's chuckle was garbage you feed them, at least till you graduate and can be dumped on the street. This design is so-so. There have been some adoptions, mainly because it has good mechanics, but if we're talking real quality, it just doesn't measure up. The creature flexed its custom battle scars. I do other things. Yes, and if you never deliver, you'll fail with them too. That was a point that occupied a lot of Juan Orozco's internal worry time. More and more, it looked like he was going to end up like his pop. Well, only Juan might never even get a job to be laid off from. Try your best was the motto of Fairmount High, but trying your best was only a beginning. I mean, even if you tried your best, you could still be left behind. These were not things he would confess to another gamer. He glared back at the slitted yellow eyes, and suddenly it occurred to him, unlike his teachers, this guy was not being paid to be nice, and it was wasting too much time for this to be some humiliating con. It actually wants something from me. Juan sharp. That could be things going. How would you like to take an affiliate status on a little project? Except for local games, no one had ever asked Juan to affiliate on anything. His mouth twisted in bogus contempt. Affiliate? A percent of what? I mean, how far down the value chain are you? The Saurian shrugged, and there was a sound of ginkgos creaking against its shoulders. I'm way down. That's how it is with most affiliances, but I can pay real money for each answer I pipe upwards. The creature named a number. It was enough to ride the free fall every day for a year. A payoff search, anyone he recruited would get a lot more. And Juan was sure it was smiling. Okay, well, what do you want? And what makes you think a dwit like me can supply it? You're at Fairmount High, aren't you? Well, you already know that. It's a strange place, isn't it? I mean, well, when Juan did not reply, the critter said, trust me, it's strange. Most schools, even charter schools, don't schedule adult education students with the children. Yeah, the vocational track, the old farts don't like it, we don't like it. Well, the task for my upstream affiliate is to snoop around, mainly among these old guys, make friends with them. Yicko. But Juan glanced at the payoff certificate again. It tested valid. The payoff adjudication was more complicated than he wanted to read, but it was backed by Bank of America. Who in particular? That's the problem. I mean, who's ever at the top of my affiliate is coy. We are just collecting information. Basically, some of these senior citizens used to be big shots. Well, if they were so big, how come they're in our classes now? I mean, it was the question the kids ask at school. Lots of reasons, Juan. Some of them are just lonely. Some of them are up to their ears in debt and have to figure out how to make a living in the current economy. Some of them aren't good for much, but healthy body and lots of old memories. They can be very bitter. How do I make friends with people like that? Well, if you want the money, you figure out a way. This covers a lot of ground. Retired San Diego politicians, bioscientists, parents of persons currently in such job categories. There are qualifying characteristics in the link. Your job is to interest appropriate people in my affiliates. I'm just not that good at talking people up. Wait a minute. I'm supposed to. Okay, good. I'm just not good at talking people up, especially people like this. Stay poor then, chicken. Juan was silent for a moment. His pa would never take a job like this. Finally, he said, okay, I'll go affiliate with you. I wouldn't want you to do anything you feel is I said I'll take the job. Okay, well then, what I've given you should get you started. And then there's the contact info in this document. The creature lumbered to its feet, and now its voice came from high above. Just as well we don't meet again on Pyramid Hill. Suits me, Juan said, and he stood up and he made a point of slapping the creature's mighty tail as he walked downhill. Next section. The twins were way ahead of him, standing by the soccer field on the other side of campus. As Juan came up the driveway, he grabbed a viewpoint in the bleachers and gave them a ping. Fred waved back, but his shirt was still too gooey for calm. Jerry was looking upward at the UpX shipment falling towards his outstretched hands, just in time for sure. Twins were popping the mailer open even as they walked to the shop tent. Unfortunately, Juan's first class was at the end of the far wing, so he ran across the lawn, keeping his vision tied to unimproved reality. The buildings were mostly 3 stories high, 3 stories today. Their gray walls were like playing cards stacked in a rickety array. Inside, the choice of view was not entirely his own. Mornings, the school administration required that Fairmount News show all over all of the interior walls. 3 kids at Hoover High had won IBM career fellowships. Applause, applause, even if Hoover was Fairmount's unfairly advantaged rival, a charter school run by the math ed department at SDSU. The 3 young geniuses would have their college education paid for right through grad school, even if they never worked a day at IBM. Big deal, Juan thought, trying to comfort himself. Someday those kids might be very rich, but a percentage of their professional fortunes would always go back to IBM. He followed the little green nav arrows with half his attention and abruptly realized he had climbed 2 flights of stairs. School admin had rearranged everything since yesterday. Of course, they had updated his nav arrows too, and it was a good thing he hadn't been paying attention. He slipped into the class and sat down. Next section. Miss Chumlig had already started. Search and analysis was Chumlig's main thing. She used to teach a fast-track version of this at Hoover High, but well-documented rumor held that she just couldn't keep up. So the Department of Education had moved her to the same named course here at Fairmount. Actually, Juan kind of liked her. She was a failure too. There are many different skills, she was saying. Sometimes it's best to coordinate with lots of other people who together can make the answers. The students nodded. Be a coordinator. That's where the biggest and most famous money was. But they also knew where Chumlig was going with this. She looked around the classroom, nodding that she knew they knew. Alas, you all intend to be top agents, don't you? It's what some of us will be. That's what one of the adult ed students said. Winston Blount was old enough to be Juan's great-grandfather. When Blount had a bad day, he liked to liven things up by harassing Miss Chumlig. The search and analysis instructor smiled back. It's about as likely as being a Major League Baseball star. The pure coordinating agent is a rare type, Dean Blount. Some of us must be the administrators. Oh, Chumlig looked kind of sad for a moment, like she was figuring out how to pass on bad news. Administration has changed a lot, Dean Blount. Winston Blount sat back in his chair. Okay, so we have to learn some new tricks. Yes, Miss Chumlig looked over the class. That's an important point. This class is about search and analysis, the heart of the economy. We obviously need search and analysis as consumers. It's almost all modern jobs. Search and analysis are how we are going to make our living. But in the end, we must also know something about something. Meaning those courses we got C's in, right? That was a voice from the peanut gallery, probably someone who was physically truant. Chumlig sighed. Yes, don't let those skills die. You've been exposed to them. Use them, improve on them. You can do it with a special form of pre-analysis that I call study. One of the students actually held up a hand. She was that old. Yes, Dr. Zhang. I know you are correct, but... And the woman glanced around the room. She looked about Chumlig's age, not nearly as old as Winston Blount, but there was a kind of frightened look in her eyes. But some people are better than others. I'm not as sharp as I once was, or maybe others are just sharper. What happens if we try our hardest and it just isn't good enough? Chumlig hesitated. How will she answer this? Thought Juan. It was the real question. That's a problem that affects everyone, Dr. Zhang. Providence gives each of us our hand to play. In your case, you've got a new deal and a new start on life. Her look took in the rest of the class. Some of you think your hand in life is all deuces and trays. At the front of the room were some really dedicated students, not much older than Juan, and they were wearing, but they had no clothes sense and they had never learned to ensemble coding. As Chumlig spoke, you could see their fingers tapping away, searching on deuces and trays. But I have a theory of life, said Chumlig, and it is straight out of gaming. There is always an angle. Each of you have some special wild cards. Play with them. Find out what makes you different and better. Because it is there, if only you can find it. And once you do, you'll be able to contribute answers to others, and others will be willing to contribute back to you. And in short, synthetic serendipity doesn't just happen. By golly, you must create it. She hesitated, staring at invisible class notes, and her voice dropped down from oratory. So much for the big picture. Today, we're going to talk about morphing answer board solutions. And as usual, we're looking to ask the right questions. Juan liked to sit by the outer wall, especially when the classroom was on the third floor. You could feel the wall sway gently back and forth as the building kept its balance. That sort of thing made his ma real nervous. 1 second of system failure and everything will fall apart, she had complained at a PTA meeting. On the other hand, House of Cards construction was cheap, and it could handle a big earthquake almost as easily as it did the morning breeze. He leaned away from the wall and listened to Chumlig. That was why the school made you show up in person for most classes. You had to pay a little bit of attention just because you were trapped in a real room with a real instructor. Chumlig's lecture graphics floated in the air above them. She had the class's attention. There was a minimum of insolent graffiti nibbling at the edges of her imagery. And for a while, Juan paid attention too. He really did. Answer boards could generate solid results, usually for zero cost. There were no affiliations, just kindred minds batting problems around. But what if you weren't a kindred mind? Say you were on a genetics board. If you thought transcription was a type of translation, it could take you months to get anywhere. So Juan had tuned her out and wandered from viewpoint to viewpoint around the room. Some were from students who'd set their viewpoints public, and most were just random cams. He browsed Big Lizard's task document as he paused between hops. In fact, the lizard was interested in more than just the old farts. Some ordinary students made the list too. This affiliance must be as wide as the California lottery. He started some background checks. Like most kids, he kept lots of stuff saved on his wearable. He could run a search like this very close to his vest. He didn't route to the outside world except when he could use a site that Chumlig was talking about. She was really good at nailing the mentally truant. But Juan was good at ensemble coding, driving his wearable with little gesture cues and eye pointer menus. And as her gaze passed over him, he nodded brightly and replayed the last few seconds of her talk. As for the old students, competent retreads would never be here. They'd be rich and famous, the people who owned the most of the real world. The ones in adult education were the has-beens. These people trickled into Fairmount all through the semester. The old folks' hospitals refused to batch them up for the beginning of class. They claimed that senior citizens were socially mature, able to handle the jumble of mid-semester entrance. Juan went from face to face, matching against public records. Winston Blount, this guy was a saggy mess. Retread medicine was such a crap shot. Some things it could cure and others it couldn't. And what worked was different from person to person. Winston Blount had not been a total winner. Just now, the old guy was squinting intensely, trying to follow Chumley's answer board example. He had been in several of Juan's classes. Juan couldn't see the guy's med records, but he guessed that his mind was mostly okay. He was just as sharp as some of the kids in the class. And once upon a time, he had been an important player at UCSD. Once upon a time. Okay, put him on the of interest list. And then there was Zhu Zhang, PhD physics, PhD electrical engineering, 2010 winner of the President's Medal for Secure Computation. Overall, the hot stuff index on her was almost Nobel quality. Dr. Zhang sat hunched over, looking at the table in front of her. She was trying to keep up on a view page? Poor lady. But for sure, she would have connections. Chumlig was still going on about how to morph results into new questions, oblivious of Juan's truancy. Who's next? Robert Gu. For a moment, Juan thought he was the wrong viewpoint, and then he sneaked a glance to the right where the adult education crocs hung out. Robert Gu, PhD, literature, a poet. He was sitting with the crocs, but he looked about 17 years old. Juan brought up his apparent attention back to Ms. Chumlig and expected the new arrival close up. Gu was slender, almost scrawny and tall. His skin was smooth and unblemished, but he looked like he was sweating. Juan risked a peek at the outside medical references. Aha! Symptoms of the Ven Kurosawa treatment. Robert Gu was a lucky man, the 1 in 1,000 to fully respond to that piece of retread magic. On the other hand, it looked to Juan like the guy had run out of luck after that. He was fully unpingable. There was a crumpled piece of view page on his desk, but he wasn't using it. Years ago, the guy had been more famous than Zhao Zhang, but he was an even bigger loser now. What was deconstructive revisionism anyway? Oh, well, definitely not something on the big lizard's list, and Juan slid the name into the trash can. But wait, he hadn't checked out Gu's family connections. He queried, and suddenly there was silent messaging hanging in letters of silent flame all around his vision. Chumlig, Orozco, silent message. You have all day to play games, Juan. If you won't pay attention here, you can darn well take this course over. Close message. Orozco to Chumlig. Silent message. Sorry. He suspended his question queue and dropped the external session, and at the same time, he played back the last few minutes of her talk, desperately trying to summarize. Most times, Chumlig just asked embarrassing questions. This was the first she'd smidged him with a threat. And the amazing thing was, she'd done it in a short pause when everyone else thought she was looking at her notes. Juan eyed her with new respect. You were a little hard on the boy, don't you think? Rabbit was trying out the new imagery today, this based on classic Alice in Wonderland illustrations, complete with engraving lines. The effect was fully silly on a three-dimensional body. Big Lizard did not seem impressed. You don't belong down here. Juan is my direct affiliate, not yours. A bit overly sensitive, aren't you? I'm simply spot-checking the depths of my affiliates. Well, stay out. Juan needs this class. Of course I share your charitable motives. The rabbit gave the lizard his most dishonest leer. But you cut him off just when he was looking at someone especially interesting to me. I have provided you with a most excellent affiliance. If you want my continued support, you must cooperate. Listen, I want the boy to reach out for himself, but I don't want him to be hurt. Lizard's voice trailed off, and Rabbit wondered if Chumlig was finally having second thoughts. Not that it mattered. Rabbit was having fun spreading out across the Southern California social scene. Sooner or later, he would figure out what this job was all about. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 4. So this is chapter 5, Dr. Zhang's She. Shop class. It was by far Juan Orozco's favorite class. Shop was like a premium game. There were real gadgets to touch and connect. That was the sort of thing you paid top money for at Pyramid Hill. And Mr. Williams was no Louise Chumlig. He let you follow your own inclinations, but he never came around afterwards and complained because you hadn't accomplished anything. It was almost impossible not to get an A in Ron Williams' class. He was wonderfully old-fashioned. Shop class was also Juan's best opportunity to make progress on Big Lizard's project, at least with the old farts and the do-not-call privacy freaks. He wandered around the big gadget tent looking like an utter idiot. Juan had never been any good at diplomacy games, and now he was schmoozing oldsters. Well, trying to. Zhao Zhang was a really nice lady, but she just sat at the equipment bench and read from her view page. She had the parts list formatted like some sort of hard copy catalog. Once I knew these things, she said. See that? She pointed at the section in the museum page. Zhang's secure hardware environment. I designed that system. Juan came up with, you're world class, Dr. Zhang. But I don't understand even the principles of these new components. They look more like pond scum than self-respecting optical semiconductors. She read one of the product descriptions and stopped at the third line. What's redundant entanglement? Ah, he looked up, saw pointers into jungles of background concepts. You don't need to know about redundant entanglement, ma'am, not for this class. He waved at the product description on Zhang's view page. The image was like carven stone, not responding to his gesture. Go forward a few pages. You'll find the stuff we have available here in class. Look under, geez, this was a pain, spelling out navigation in words. Look under fun functional compositions and go from there. And he showed her how to use her view page to ID local parts. You don't need to understand everything. Oh. In a few moments, she was playing with the possibilities, had downloaded a half a dozen component gadgets. This is like being a child, doing without understanding. But she started pulling build-it parts together, doing pretty well after Juan showed her how to find the interface specs. She laughed at some of the descriptions. Sorters and shifters, solid-state robots. I bet I can make a cutter out of this. I don't see it. Cutter? Don't worry, you can't hurt anything. That wasn't quite true, but close enough. He sat and watched, made a few suggestions, even though he wasn't really sure what she was up to. Enough of establishing a rapport. He marked the box in his diplomacy checklist and moved to the next stage. So, Dr. Zhang, do you keep in touch with your friends at Intel? Oh, that was a long time ago. I retired in 2010. And during the war, well, I couldn't even get consulting jobs. I could just feel my skills rusting out. Alzheimer's? He knew she was much older than she looked, even older than Winston Blount. Zhang hesitated, and for a moment, Juan was afraid he'd made the lady really angry. But then she gave a sad little laugh. No, not Alzheimer's, no dementia. You people nowadays don't know what it was like to be old. I do so. All my grandparents are still alive, and I have a great-grandpa in Puebla, and he plays a lot of golf. Great-grandma, well, she does have dementia, the kind that they still can't fix. In fact, great-grandma had looked as young as Dr. Zhang, and everyone thought she had really lucked out, but in the end, that only meant she lived long enough to run into something that they couldn't cure. Dr. Zhang just shook her head. Even in my day, not everyone went senile, not the way you mean. I just got behind in my skills. My girlfriend died, and after a while, I just didn't care so much. I didn't have the energy to care. She looked at the gadget she was building. Now I have at least the energy. And I had when I was maybe 60, and maybe I even have the same naive intelligence. She slapped the table. And I'm good. All I'm good for is playing with jacked up Lego blocks. Oh, Lego. It almost looked like she was going to start crying right in the middle of shop class. Juan scanned around. No one seemed to be watching. He reached out to touch Zhang's hand. He didn't have the answer. Miss Chumlig would say he didn't have the right question. There were still a few others to check out. Winston Blount, for instance, not a jackpot case, but he ought to be worth something to the lizard. In shop class, Blount just sat in the shade of the tent, staring off into space. The guy was wearing, but he didn't respond to messages. Juan waited until went off for one of his coffee breaks and then sidled over and sat down beside Blount. Geez, the guy looked really old. Juan couldn't tell exactly where he was surfing, but it had nothing to do with shop class. Juan had noticed that when Blount wasn't interested in class, he just blew it off. After a few minutes' silence, Juan realized he wasn't interested in socializing either. So talk to him. It's just another kind of monster whacking. Juan morphed a buffoon image onto the guy, and suddenly it wasn't so hard to cold start the encounter. So Dean Blount, what do you think of shop class? Ancient eyes turned to look at him. I couldn't care less, Mr. Orozco. Okay. There was a lot about Winston Blount that was public record, even some legacy news group correspondence, and that was always good for getting a grown-up's attention. Fortunately, Blount continued talking on his own. I'm not like some of the people here. I've never been senile. By rights, I shouldn't be here. By rights? Maybe he could score points just by imitating an old-time shrink program. Yes, I was Dean of Arts and Letters through 2012. I was on track to be UCSD Chancellor, and instead I was put into academic retirement. Juan knew all that. But you never learned to wear. Blount's eyes narrowed. I made it a point never to wear. I thought wearing was a demeaning fad. He shrugged. I was wrong. I paid a heavy price for that. But things have changed. His eyes glittered with deliberate iridescence. I've taken 4 semesters of this adult education. Now my resume is out there in the ether. You must know a lot of important people. Indeed, success is just a matter of time. You know, Dean, I might be able to help. No, wait, I don't mean myself. I have an affiliate you might be interested in. Oh, well, he seemed to know what affiliates was, and Juan explained Big Lizard's deal, so there could be some real money in this. He showed him the payout certificates and wondered how much his recruit would see there. Blount squinted his eyes, no doubt trying to parse the certificates into a form that Bank of America could validate. After a moment, he nodded without granting Juan numerical enlightenment. But money isn't everything, especially in my situation. Well, I bet whoever's behind these certs would have a lot of angles. Maybe you could get a conversion to help in kind. Something you need. True. They talked a few minutes till the place got busy and some of the shop projects were finally showing results. At least 2 teams had made mobile nodes, swarm devices. Tiny paper wings fluttered all around, and the other swarmer crawled in the grass and up the legs of the furniture and chairs. It stayed out of clothes, but it was awfully close to being intrusive. Juan zapped a few of them, but the others kept coming. Orozco de Blount, a silent message. Can you read me? Of course I can, replied the man. So despite Blount's claims of wittitude, he couldn't manage silent messaging, not even the finger tapping most grown-ups used. The class period was almost over anyway. Juan looked up at the billowing tent fabric. He was a little discouraged. He had covered almost everyone on the list, and Winston Blount was the best he'd found, someone who couldn't even sming. Okay, well, keep my offer in mind, Dean Blount, and remember there are only a limited number of people I'm allowed to take in. Blount rewarded the sales jabber with a thin smile. Meantime, I have other possibilities. Juan nodded in the direction of the weird new guy, Robert Gu. Winston Blount didn't follow Juan's gaze, but you could tell he was sneaking a peek sideways, and for a moment, the skin on his face seemed to tighten, and then the smile returned. May God have mercy on your soul, Mr. Orozco. Juan didn't get his chance at Robert Gu until Friday, right after Ms. Chumlig's other class. Creative composition was almost always the low point of Juan's school week. Chumlig was flexible as to media, but students had to stand up and perform their work. Now, that was bad enough when you had to watch some other kids mess up, but unbearable when you were the performer. Order of appearance was decided at Miss Chumlig's whim. Normally, worrying about that would have occupied most of Juan's attention. Today, he had other concerns that mercifully blotted out the usual panic. Juan skulked to the back of the class and slumped down covertly, watching the others. Winston Blount was here, which was a surprise. He blew off this class almost as often as he did shop. But he took me up on the offer. The Lizard's account showed that the old man had taken his first step towards signing on. And on the far side of the room, Robert Gu was surfing with his view page. Even that looked like a struggle for the guy, but it turned out that Gu was part of a particular Marine Corps family, and when Juan had reviewed all of the affiliation interactions, he found that was a big plus. If he could just interest Robert Gu in affiliation, he'd hit the top bonus level. Chumlig's voice cut across his thought. No volunteers for first up? Well, and she looked off into thin air and then turned to Juan. Hooray. All right, so I guess that's our 2 chapters for the night. Next time will be chapter 6, so much technology, so little talent. So I hope you enjoyed the newest installment. I do think that Pyramid Hill and the augmented reality and the different mesh nodes, when I first read that, 6 or 7 years ago, I didn't really have a sense of that, but I'm getting a much better sense of it now. So anyway, signing off for now. Thanks for joining in. All right. Good night, everybody.